Because what happened in the space age is almost, well, that's why so many people today have a hard time believing it. It's incredible. It's almost inconceivable. And the main goal I had actually writing this thing was constantly writing with moon landing deniers in mind. Now, you've all seen me here with this, but there are the moon landing deniers just make smoke curl out of my ears. Fire comes out of my eyes with the 9/11 conspiracy folks, but the moon landing thing is a close second. And needless to say, as you've seen, I've been just really, really, absolutely, genuinely enraged by it. But when I was doing the research for this and figuring out how to structure it, I realized something that made me, that gave me a lot more patience with people, mostly young people who don't believe the moon landing ever happened. And what that was I realized that young people who were born way after the moon landing, to them, this idea of landing on the moon, from a modern perspective, we landed on the moon 50 years ago. Oh, it can't be possible. They say it can't be possible, I think, emotionally, because they look at the moon landing as something that just kind of parachuted into our lives in the 60s. Like, we were basically sitting there and going to Vietnam and doing our thing and, and listening to rock and roll music, and all of a sudden say, hey, we're landed on the moon. Oh, really? Wow. But the thing about the moon landing that I've been working so hard to get across, and I think I've done a good job with it. The thing about the moon landing is that Apollo 11 is a miracle compared to, well, today, for example, it's just a miracle. But Apollo 11 was not a miracle compared to Apollo 10. Apollo 10 went to the moon, orbited the moon. They took the LEM, detached it, took it down to 50,000 feet. That's about a third again higher than your commercial airline flight. And they both got a chance to go back. John Young and Gene Cernan in Apollo 10 came down to 50,000 feet from the moon. And then they basically did the abort option and ditched the bottom. I think they ditched the bottom stage. I'm not 100% sure about that. But I know certainly they didn't land, and they came back up and rendezvoused, went home. So compared to Apollo 10, Apollo 11 was still impressive, but it wasn't magic compared to Apollo 10. Apollo 10 wasn't magic compared to Apollo 9. 9 wasn't magic compared to 8. 8 wasn't magic compared to 7. And then all of the Gemini missions going backwards, all the way to the Mercury missions, and then back to the V1, the V2, the A4 actually. And then Goddard and bottle rockets. So I've got this situation where you start out with a 4th of July bottle rocket, you end up with footprints on the moon, and if you look at it in context and you see the whole picture, you realize that there's no place to insert the conspiracy because the continuum is so smooth between the bottle rocket and the moon landing that there's no place to insert the conspiracy. The biggest jump, honestly, is between the bottle rocket and Robert Goddard's liquid-fueled rocket. That was the beginning of the space age, 1923, when Goddard launched the first liquid-fueled rocket. You can't get to the moon without a liquid-fueled rocket, and that's when it all began. But from the Goddard rocket to the von Braun's A4, from the A4 to the WAC Corporal, and you're getting staging, and then the A4, the V2, essentially becomes the Redstone, and then you have parallel ICBMs with Atlas and Titan and all the rest of it. The whole thing goes up in a perfectly linear fashion, and there's no place that you can't slip the Joker into that deck anywhere. There's no place to fit it. So that's my actual goal as far as getting people to believe it happened. If you watch the whole thing, you'll realize that there's no place to insert it. Steve Darrow points out it's a disturbingly high percentage of people. I saw something recently posted on Apollo 11. It was some kind of enhanced thing of the landing or something. And the first 25 comments on YouTube were every single one of them was, I can't believe you believe this nonsense. I can't believe you bought this lie. But this is a better answer than, although it's necessary to debunk all of the stuff that they say. How come the shadows don't match? And how come Buzz Aldrin is, if he's in darkness, he should be pitch black? And these things are so easy to explain. But the one thing that never gets explained ever is the context. I have never heard anything about the moon landing being faked that had anything to do with Apollo 10 or Apollo 12. And Apollo 10 and Apollo 12 also happened. Apollo 11 wasn't magic compared to 10. 12 wasn't magic compared to 11, and on and on and on we go. So, if this whole thing is going to be a conspiracy, at the very least, you'd think we would go once. Why did we go back? Isn't that just another chance to screw things up? Isn't that just another chance to be found out? And then you get to have some fun too. I'll show you the picture because this is worth seeing. Just because I'm on this little roll here. This one I can figure out quickly. It's nice to be able to just go and drag and drop pictures into this software. It is so much better than what we have in the olden days. Which one? Does it work? Sure. All right, I'm going to bring something in here. Hang on. Oi. Let me shrink that puppy down. Oh, I'm shrinking the wrong puppy down. Let me shrink that puppy down. There we go. And let's make this puppy big again. Hooray. Hooray for me. Look who did a good job. But what I want to show you here is the picture, so let me fix my video first. As I said, working with engineers and stuff was a shocking development for me. Is that it? That's it. Yes. Okay, so this is a photograph of the world's largest vacuum chamber. It is the largest vacuum chamber in the world. It's at the space. Where is that? It's part of NASA. It's in Sandusky, Ohio, at the renamed Glenn Research Center. It's in Sandusky, Ohio. Now take a look at this because this is really important. Really important. This structure is the largest structure that we have ever constructed on Earth that was capable of withstanding an actual vacuum. That alone is an astonishing thing to say if you think about it. I mean, it really just is almost inconceivable. But think about it. This structure is what is necessary in order to make a space that is maybe marginally larger than the footpads of the LEM into a vacuum. And you can see from the thickness of the walls and the size of those steel doors that this building has to undergo unbelievable amounts of pressure. And this is one of the things that none of us realize, that we're sitting here walking around and we're sitting there watching dinner or having dinner, and I'm sitting here chatting in the lounge, and I've got some lights on, I'm staring into a camera and all the rest of that stuff. But what we don't realize is that there is about 100 miles of atmosphere on top of us, pressing down all the time. And the reason we don't feel it is because there's atmosphere down here too. It's like if you have a piece of tissue paper, and you were to take a piece of tissue paper and put it in a frame, let's say, and punch your finger through it, no problem. But if you punch your finger through it and at the same time you have another finger punching the same way, then the thing doesn't rupture. So the thing that is for me, not that I need much convincing, but for me, this is the killer. That's the largest vacuum chamber we can make in the world. It has to be incredibly strong because the forces of the atmosphere pressing down are strong enough to cause anything to implode. I've seen dumpsters or those cargo containers just crumple like paper cups if you pull enough air out of the inside of them. But the thing about this that I state, and I really just like very much, I think I'll probably just ditch this now. Yeah, you can go. Go away. Remove. The thing that I, oh God, the thing that I think is the best evidence. Not that I need to convince any of you guys, but the best evidence is if you look at the actual landing, out the window landing from the LEM. If you look at virtually every frame of video, whenever any astronaut is on the surface in motion, or when they're coming down to final approach on any of the other 5 landings, you'll see something. Neil and Buzz looked out the window, and they saw something, before they landed on the moon, they saw something no one had ever seen before, ever. And that's really kind of blew my mind when I realized it. No one had ever seen what they were looking out at the window about a minute before they landed. And what they were seeing was dust, but it wasn't a dust cloud. People think, oh, there's dust, we can't see. It's not like a billowy cloud came up. Dirt was flying out from underneath the LEM exactly like water. And if you want to think of how the dust behaves, the best way to think about it is taking a high pressure garden hose with one of those jets on the front, and then just pointing it straight down in concrete and letting it go. The dust just goes flying out in all directions at these incredibly high speeds. If you can't make dust behave like that unless it's in a vacuum. Look at all of the stuff on the Apollo 11 moonwalk. Every time any one of the astronauts moves their feet, you'll see the dust will go in a little spray, just like it's water. It's exactly like it's water. And it just sprays, doesn't go up, doesn't get dusty, you sprays. And by the time you get to the rover, it's just everywhere. So you can't make dust do that unless it's in a vacuum. You can't... You just can't do it. It's not possible. There's certainly a long time before computer graphics. It would be much harder, much, it was impossible to make a computer graphics image, or CG, in 1969. It wasn't impossible to go to the moon. But my point is, that little fly of dust, whenever you look at anything from the moon, you will see the dust behave that way. And that's proof that it's in a vacuum. And the reason I showed you the vacuum facility there is that in order to make a studio big enough to fake the moon landing and to put that studio in a vacuum, it's harder than going to the moon. It's much harder of an engineering challenge. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, then why the hell did we, if this whole thing is fake and it's all done in a studio, why did we include a golf cart that went 20 kilometers? That seems to me like we're pushing our luck a little, don't you think? A studio the size of whatever it takes to run the background and go 20 kilometers. This is the kind of thing. This is how it works. I've been a victim of this kind of thing before. You show people a few points of data. You point out a couple things that seem to be unexplainable contradictions, and you've got them convinced. But if I were to just play just nothing but say, oh, the moon landing's a fake, and all I were to do is say, okay, and I just ran 5 minutes of Apollo 17, not 11, 17. You'll ask yourself, well, I see the craters, and they keep on going, and they keep on going, and they keep on going, and the dust is doing all this other stuff. Where the hell did they film this? And you don't even have to close the argument. There it is. So there's something about it. I'd like to get people's comments actually on what they think, what drives this emotionally. I have some theories, but I'd like to read a few comments live from people, some insight into what they think drives people to vehemently deny that the moon landing ever occurred. So I've got a couple of theories, and I think they're all of them. Postmodern denialism, it's a great term. Lord Bios, I just don't know what it means. Being in the know instead of a rube. You got it, Steve. You got it. It's being in the know. It's secret knowledge. It's the sense that you are smart and everybody else is stupid. You're not one of the sheeple who bought into this this fiction. It's a sign that you're not only smarter than everybody else, but you're also in on something. You're on a smaller group. I'm looking at all of it. And people thrive on conspiracy. Right. It's wanting to be seen as different. That's really it, And a not 47 yet said people need to feel significant so they can claim to be knowledgeable. That's what it is. It makes them feel sophisticated. It makes them feel knowledgeable. It makes them feel like they are above everybody else. It makes them feel higher than they are. And this is the entire zeitgeist of the modern age, is how do I find a way, now that everybody has a voice on the internet, how do I find a way to make people realize I'm smarter than everybody and better? This is progressivism in a nutshell. And no wonder they hate the moon landing. Somebody pointed out to me once that one of the reasons they think that millennials are that the number of moon landing deniers, such a high percentage of them are young people, is because millennials have been raised, not through any fault of their own, that to believe that they were the most special people ever, and everything they did was a gold star, and every piece of art they ever did had to go not only on the refrigerator but in a museum, and they've been told that they're the smartest, best educated, most amazing, indigo-auraed people in the history of the world, and now they're confronted with the fact that their grandfathers did something that is absolutely beyond their ability. Not just beyond their ability to do, beyond their ability to imagine. The complexity of Apollo, the mission, the complexity of the mission can be understood if you have somebody decent who knows how to explain it. But needless to say, when you get down to the engineering and all the valves and all the rest of that stuff that had to happen, it's an army. But the actual explanation of the mission is it. And Kulak 76 says we came home because we got bored. I think the coolest thing I ever heard about the moon landing, about the Apollo program, it wasn't my favorite thing. It wasn't inspiring. I just thought it was interesting. Somebody once said, America is such an amazing country that we got bored with going to the moon. That's really pretty much it. We got bored with going to the moon. We did it. And we got bored with it. And I would like in the future, I'm going to continue, needless to say, it's not just obligations, my obligation and my great pleasure is to produce 12 shows a week here at BillWhittle.com. I don't know if anything else is going to happen with that said. I'd like it to. But even if it doesn't, what happened? What happened? It's like the country got shot. It's almost like the country, it's like America was driving down the streets of Dallas in a convertible and then boom, gone. And what happened? I don't know. I know that most of the people who are, associates and friends and stuff of BillWhittle.com and Stratosphere Lounge, I know they all think the way I do at least about these things. And I know a lot of people from the space age, and they're pretty much tremendously successful people. And I hasten to add, there are a number of people out there, not a huge number, but a number of people out there who were not born during or grew up during the space age who have that right stuff. Now, Steve Darrow says Saul Alinsky happened. Yes and no. I'd really like to get people's opinion on this. yes, Saul Alinsky happened. And there's no question about that. But Saul Alinsky and his book were just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of books written by, bitter lunatics. Why is it that Saul Alinsky, why the Saul Alinsky form of this progressivism, why did that take root? Why? Was it Vietnam? I just genuinely don't know. It's just really, it's just hard. Some people here are saying they have friends who work at SpaceX. I have a friend whose son works at SpaceX. And that's going to be the final hope that I'm going to end this series on. Sorry about the vision. ELB grad says it all changed after the JFK assassination. I disagree. Kennedy was assassinated in 63. We were just starting to get our feet underneath us at 63. We really didn't hit our stride. I mean, Jim and I was an amazing program. It's fun to talk about that because nobody really talks much about the Jiminy program. But we landed on the moon in 69. And I don't know how this is related. I just have a feeling that it is. It's a very trivial thing, but it's something, I can't put my finger on it. But I somehow feel it's connected, and I'd like to hear people's comments on this, and then we'll get on with the questions. You watch Mission Control during Apollo 11, and you'll see what you're used to seeing. You'll see guys with like button-down short-sleeve shirts. Everybody's wearing a tie. Everybody's got, pocket protectors for their pens. Then watch Mission Control, not for the shuttle or anything. Just look at the guys in Mission Control for Apollo 17. 2.5 years later. If you look at the Mission Control from Apollo 17, you're going to start seeing the big wide sideburns, and you're going to start seeing the big wide lapels, and you're going to start seeing something happening that wasn't there before. And needless to say, it's ugly, as James Lilacs, who we talked about last week, I guess it was, said, the 70s were the wide decade. But seriously, now, I really think something connected here. I don't know what it was, but if you look at the guys on Mission Control for 17, they just... what had happened to the Mission Control by 1972, even the space guys at Mission Control and NASA had been touched by the 60s. And when I say the 60s, I mean the late 60s, because most of the 60s was Neil Armstrong, clean cut, science nerds. When people say the 60s, what they're usually talking about is 1967 to maybe 72, 73. But somehow, and it's not obvious, it's not hard to figure out how, somehow that kind of rolling around in the mud doing acid at Woodstock, 60s, started to work its way into the we choose to go to the moon 60s. And if the clothes were changing, then attitudes were changing too, somehow. And that's a big mystery to me that I'd like to explore in the future.